Okay, guys, we're doing good here.
Today is September 29, 2009. We are taping this interview in the studio of the Video Club of Laguna Woods, California. This is the Veterans History Project of the Library of Congress of the United States, in partnership with the Historical Society of Laguna Woods. Our guest today is David Hartman. He was born on March 28, 1924, and really served in two branches of the Army Air Force, and then the Army, and was in the infantry. And I am Carly Lutzow. Good morning, David. So nice of you to come and share your memories with us. Would you tell us your full name?
I'm David Hartman.
And when were you born?
I was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1924, quite a while ago.
And the date is?
March the 28th.
Thank you. Well, did you stay in Brooklyn, or did you, is that where you went to school?
I went to elementary and junior high school and high school. In those years, we were graduated rather early if we showed any kind of academic prowess. And I was already a freshman in college at the age of 16.
Okay, where did you go to college?
Well, I went to a number of colleges. The first college was New York University up in Manhattan, Washington Heights. Actually it was in the Bronx, New York. And I was there only for a semester, and my family ran out of money, and so I couldn't remain there. And from that point on, I went to several other colleges. I went to City College, and I went to Columbia after the war, and then to law school, and back to college to do graduate studies, and so
okay.
All New York.
All in New York. You stayed in New York. Did you enlist, or were you drafted?
I enlisted.
Do you recall what the date is or about?
In December the 15th of 1942, I enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Force.
And then what did you do?
Well,
where did they send you for basic?
I had experience as an aircraft mechanic. I had, in order to learn a trade, which was very fashionable at that time, after high school and a bit of college, I went to a National Youth Administration facility up in northern Maine. And there the government sponsored a program called National Youth Administration, and I learned aircraft mechanics. In a few months' time, I became a skilled and licensed aircraft mechanic. At the end of that period, the school, government operated, was able to get jobs for some of us, and I was able to get a job at an air base in Connecticut, a U.S. Army Air Force fighter base.
About what, was this in the 30s?
No, this was 1942, actually.
Okay.
And it was very early 1942, late 41 or early 42.
Okay.
And I worked at Bradley Field in Windsor Locks, Connecticut, as an aircraft mechanic on fighter planes for a period of time, working as a civilian alongside of actual Army Air Force personnel. I became quite interested in flying at the time. I never had flown, and ultimately enlisted in the Air Force with the idea of perhaps becoming a fighter pilot, having worked on P-47 Thunderbolt airplanes, fighter planes like the P-51 Mustang and the P-38, the Lockheed fighter. And lo and behold, after enlisting, I made a terrible discovery. I passed all the requirements except for one thing, and that was that I discovered, or they discovered, that I had a rare kind of color blindness. Now, of course, I could always tell blue from red or white from black, but this color blindness was such that it barred me from becoming a flyer. And so they said, sorry, David, you cannot fly in the Air Force. And I had never known that I had this rare form of color vision.
What happened next?
Defect. I then went into the area that I knew best, which was ground crew. I became an aircraft mechanic. I was sent early in my military life over to England, and I worked for quite a number of months, probably 21 or 22 months, at different air bases on mostly B-17 Flying Fortress airplanes, repairing the damaged planes when they came back from the missions over Germany. And around the winter of 1944, I was still in England, age 19 to 20, around maybe 20 years of age. Losses at the front, and particularly at the beginning of the winter of 1944, was so great that the military was, in a sense, forced to take many of us out of what was, we thought, a needed branch of service, the Air Force, and transfer us into being combat soldiers. Sent us for about 3 weeks of intense combat training with live ammunition and bayonet drills and crawling on our bellies under machine gun fire, throwing hand grenades, etc. And then sent us to, and we had no choice in the matter. Of course, some of us were nonplussed. We had been enlistees in the Air Force, and all of a sudden we were now being transferred at the convenience of Uncle Sam. But we understood and grinned and bore it. Went over to Europe, across the Channel, to replacement depots, and I was assigned at that point to General Patton's 3rd Army and into the 9th Armored Infantry Division. And this was around the time of the Battle of the Bulge. And I did get to see some serious heavy-duty action. On my stomach, crawling in the mud, just like the movies. Very exciting stuff, very scary. The unique thing that happened was that on one occasion, late at night, in a foxhole in cold, wet, muddy conditions, I discovered something that was lying there in the mud, wet and sticky, and it turned out to be some lined sheets of paper with some handwriting on it, and I was able barely to discern that it was a poem, a long poem. Of course, I had no opportunity to read it, but I stuffed it into my knapsack. Sometime later, when I had the opportunity, I took a look and saw what it was that I had. And it was a poem called The Song of the Infantry. No author's name, handwritten, torn, wet, and muddy. At first opportunity, I copied what was on these handwritten sheets onto some fresh paper. What happened to the original material papers, I don't know. I guess I just didn't think of the value or possible value of them, and so I discarded them. They were useless. But the poem was preserved, called The Song of the Infantry. And I have since put it onto typewritten paper and then ultimately into a computer. And I have this poem, and I've been searching on and off for almost 65 years for the source of this poem. The author unknown. Found in Germany, combat zone, about February 1945. After having seen action and still in the heat of combat, where incidentally I did fortuitously win a Bronze Star. And in the course of searching for the origin of the poem, The Song of the Infantry, I ultimately, and not very long ago, communicated with the Library of Congress. With the advent of internet and Google and other sources of information, I came across a reference to a poem called Song of the Infantry on the internet, and it said that the poem appeared in and was published in a copy of Yank magazine, January 20th of 1943. Well, this was quite a lot before I had found my poem, The Song of the Infantry. I say my poem, the poem. I tried in vain to find a copy of Yank magazine, going to magazine companies, various of those who had back issues of lots of different magazines, without any success. I then sent an email to the Library of Congress, who assigned a researcher to my question. And the question that I had written to them was this: I'm seeking a war poem titled The Song of the Infantry, which reportedly was published in the January 20th, 1943 issue of Yank magazine. Does Library of Congress have that issue of Yank, or is it possibly, or another source for this poem? As a World War II combat veteran, I came across this stirring poem in Germany in early 1945, and have been trying to find a copy and identify the author for many years. Within 36 hours, I had a reply from the Library of Congress, and it said, "The Song of the Infantry does indeed appear in the January 20th, 1943 issue of Yank. I have scanned the poem, and I am attaching it to this message as a PDF file. If you have trouble opening it or have any further questions, please let me know." And it's signed by a gentleman, Peter Armenti, of the Digital Reference Team of the Library of Congress. And what they sent to me was a poem called Song of the Infantry, but not the poem that I found in the mud in Germany.
Oh, that's too bad.
Anyway, it's a very good poem.
Well, I think you ought to go on and read us your poem, because you said you would like to do that.
I would, indeed. Now, the poem that I found and have tried in vain to find the source of is a poem that's somewhat lengthy, and I find so stirring, I wish I had written it. You know that the Air Force has its own song, and the Navy has its Anchors Aweigh, and the Marines have the Halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, and the field artillery have the caissons go rolling. The infantry hasn't a song. And I was thinking how nice it would be if some of the material from this poem that I found in a muddy foxhole in Germany could serve as a foundation for a song for the infantry, which
Well, that's
doesn't
always
have a
possible. Would you
The
like
s-
to read it to us now?
The song of the infantry. Would you learn the song of the infantry that the foxhole fighters know? Then come with me to the front lines before the whistles blow. It's cold in the foxhole waiting as the 0 hour draws near, and the hands that fasten the bayonet are shaking a little with fear. And the helmet band is damp with sweat, and the hand grenades and the cloth musette are counted over and over. For the seconds drag in the infantry as you wait to spring from cover. The seconds lag in the infantry, and you wish for a plane in the infantry, or an armored train, or a tank, or a jeep. But they don't keep those in the infantry. You go on your own 2 feet. The crawling, sprawling infantry, the Shanksmere get-there infantry, the men who march to war. So you wait the ticking seconds by with your shoulders hunched and your throat gone dry. It is almost quiet. In the foredawn dark, the gunfire wanes, fades like a spark dulled in a dying wind. It is almost quiet. And then out of silence, thin and high it comes, with the muffled sound of bygone drums, with the scarce heard pound of ghostly guns, a whisper out of the past it comes, the song of the infantry. We are the men of the infantry, the men who came before you. Our battle flags are as old as time. We mark the colors for you. The Greeks of Alexander, the men of Caesar's Rome, the ragged troops of Washington who fought to free their home, the hollow square of Britain, the men who marched to meet Napoleon at Waterloo, the men who scorned defeat with Lee and Grant and Jackson, the men who stormed San Juan, the French at Chateau Thierry, the men who held the Marne, the men of Ypres, the men of Ghent, the stubborn men who trod the long red roads of China, the streets of Stalingrad, Wingate's men and Merrill's, the men of Alamein, of Kasserine, of Sicily, the beach at Kwajalein. We are the men of the infantry. Out of the past we guide you. Our battle flags are as old as time. We fly them now beside you. Then remember now as we have before, it's the infantry that wins each war, and you belong to the infantry, the muddy, bloody infantry, the valiant, gallant infantry, the men who march to war. This is the song of the infantry as the 0 hour comes on, and waiting is done for the infantry, and silence and fear are gone. Then it's up and out with helmets set, with triggered rifle and bayonet, out to settle the score. For now you know, for you've heard the song, the others do well, but you'll do more. In every age since time began, it's the infantry that wins the war. So here's to the men who fight hand to hand with no armor plate to save them. They do their job and they make their stand with only the strength God gave them. They're the thin black line on the map of war, up where the foe can find them. They're out in front of the other corps, the rest of the army behind them. They live for months in mud and rain with only a foxhole to curl in. But they're moving ahead to fight their first on the road to Berlin. So here's to the men of the infantry, the muddy, bloody infantry, the valiant, gallant infantry, the rough and ready, the tough and steady, the men who win the war.
Well, that is very, very moving. I can see why you'd like to bring it to light to more people, because it really tells the story of all of the infantrymen.
Brings tears to my eyes because I've always loved poetry.
But you were there.
I wish I had written this.
Well-
One day, perhaps we will find the source. My best guess is that the individual who so wonderfully wrote this is no longer with us.
That would be unfortunate. Well, thank you very much for sharing that with us. While you were in the infantry, what were your experiences?
Did a lot of shooting. Got shot at. I was very skinny. I was about 135 pounds and 6 feet 1. And I figured that being as thin as I was, the German bullets would have trouble finding me, and I was extremely fortunate. The casualties in my group were so indeed heavy that it was almost miraculous that I was not wounded.
Where did you go first? You said you were in the battle. Were you in the Battle of the Bulge?
Yes, I was.
What?
Well, you
Can
know,
you tell us
as
where you
a
were?
dog face GI, a lot of us were just moving around with our, they didn't say, well, we're going to this town, we're going to that area. They just said, let's go. And so you got onto a tank or a half track, which we rode in, and sometimes marched. Armored infantry were the very first of our troops that go into enemy territory. Usually the way it worked was that the Air Force would soften up, if you will, bombard certain areas where there were enemy installations. We would then move into towns. The armored infantry would be the very first spearheading groups to go into enemy towns, and we'd had to get off the half tracks and go through the streets and through homes and areas totally unknown to us to try to ferret out enemy snipers or installations. There was an awful lot of combat, a lot of fighting. As I say, I was very, very fortunate.
How did you feel about this as you were going through it?
I had a combination of fear and anger. Anger because, having been a Jewish soldier, I felt very strongly about combating the scourge of the Nazis. But being an American, I felt the same way, actually. And so and you get angry. You get very angry because when you see some of your buddies shot or maimed or killed right alongside of you. I had one of my friends, wasn't 10 feet from me, was riddled with German machine gun bullets. Killed on the spot. You get very angry and you want to do damage to the enemy. Years later, when I went to Germany as a civilian on business, and I was in a number of different businesses, one of which was the magazine field, and I went to Europe a number of times, and when I got to Germany and saw German people walking around with one arm or blind in one eye, it occurred to me that I might have been the cause of wounding or maiming some of those, and perhaps worse for some of their loved ones. And I realized the futility and the madness of war. But my experience overall was very enlarging. I often have said that I went into the Army at 18. I came out 3 years later at the age of 45. It made, and there were some values, not that many, but I learned something about comradeship. I learned to be a good poker player. Army soldiers are prone to gamble for all they have. And I learned some skills, and I learned a lot about life, I think. Actually, over in Europe, as a young soldier, I learned about love in a way. I had not had much experience with girls before having gone into the service. I had led a moderately sheltered life, but I became rather experienced, if you will, as a soldier. And I came out, and the GI Bill enabled me to go back to college, finish my college work, go to law school, become a New York attorney at law, went back to do graduate studies in English, and with the thought of earning a doctoral degree, which I never happened actually, because in the process I got married and had children, and was married for 53 years to a wonderful lady who passed away only 4 years ago, and I've since found a marvelous young woman, and we've been now married for a year. And so looking back on my Army life, my military experience, I find it touched with anguished memories and some very, very good memories. And I've been wanting so much, and perhaps I'm terribly at fault for having not done enough to find the source of the Song of the Infantry, and I'm hoping that it will be brought to light and perhaps publicized on some sort of national basis.
How
where
wonderful.
it may be enjoyed.
Let me ask another thing. When you were in your
Well, we lived on C rations and K rations. Hot food was not very well known. Plus, in England, as a fellow worker, we had mess halls and you can't be very picky as a soldier. I've since become a little bit of a gourmet and a food snob, but back then you could not afford to be.
And did you also sleep on the ground? Or did you have any place?
Much of the time. Now that was not the case in England as an Air Force person, but in the infantry, we slept on the ground. We slept in sleeping bags and under blankets and cloth. So we had to keep very, very low, because the machine gun fire was directed at you at two levels in the combat zone: ankle fire and waist fire. And so if you were at all above ground and in the line of fire, you might very easily have been hit. As I say, I was extremely fortunate, being slim, and I was able to dig down deep at times when we were under fire.
What was the weather like while you were there?
Very cold. Always very cold. Well, I was there in the winter, in the winter of 1945. One of the interesting developments was that at one time our division, my 9th Armored Infantry Division, and I'm not sure what the town was, but in Germany, by the great German tanks, the Panzers, the huge, thunderous German tanks. And they had us hemmed in, and were firing at us and destroying a lot of our line of vehicles, and we were trapped, really in trouble. And we radioed, at least that's what we were told, for air support. And lo and behold, a squadron of P-47 Thunderbolts appeared, our fighter planes, and dive bombed the German tanks. And I remembered only so many months earlier having worked on those very same P-47 Thunderbolts as a civilian. And I was thrilled to see those planes that I had worked on, not necessarily the very same ones, but the same kind of planes, and possibly even the ones that I worked on as a civilian back in Bradley Field in Connecticut, coming to my or our rescue.
Wasn't that amazing?
Dive bombed the German tanks out of existence and saved us from destruction. Quite exciting.
I would guess. Did you make any good friends in this time?
I made one very good friend who was since lost. Many buddies, but they were really like, well, I can't really describe it. I did so uncertain. We shared a lot at the time, but once we were split up and sent in different directions, coming from different parts of the nation, it was not the kind of situation where maybe some people did. No, I didn't.
So you were, when the war was over, what happened?
I was discharged in November of 1945, just 35 months after having enlisted. And was very excited because I had mustering out pay, and which was a lot of money in those days. I think it was $300. And that was like, you know, lots and lots of money.
Let me go back to one thing. You said you were in Patton's army.
Yes, General Patton's Third Army.
Did you ever have any encounter with him?
Never. The 9th Armored Infantry was just one of the divisions of what I believe was the 13th Infantry, and that was part of the 3rd Army of George Patton. And no, I never had any contact with him, nor in fact with any of the senior officers, because I never attained any rank. I wasn't really a terribly obedient soldier. I usually defied some of the junior officers or argued and so forth, and never really got promoted, never went past the rank of private first class.
You went in as a...
I went in as a private, enlisted as a private.
And you came out as a private first class.
After all that time, I rose almost negligibly.
Well, you survived. I think that's probably your biggest honor was just actually coming out of this.
Survival was the watchword.
Yeah.
And as I say, it provided a number of life experiences which couldn't normally be enjoyed or acquired anywhere but under the auspices of war.
Right. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about the time you were in the...
I beg your...
Was there anything else you'd like to tell us about the time you were in the infantry? Because you certainly told us quite a bit, but sometimes...
Well, my career wasn't particularly distinguished. I consider truly the highlight of my experience as a soldier, the discovery of the poem that I've just read, the fact that I gained a lot of life experience and met a lot of people, and was in a number of areas of the world, including France and Czechoslovakia and what have spent some time in Army of Occupation after the Germans surrendered.
How were you received then?
I beg your
How
pardon?
were you received in the towns when you were in the Army of Occupation?
Oh, well, there was a practice of non-fraternization that was enforced. They did not want American soldiers to become friendly and fraternize for a number of reasons. One is that many of the Germans continued even after the country had surrendered in May of 1945. There were pockets of German resistance that insisted on continuing to fight, and there was a group of fanatic Germans called the werewolves, which were characterized as such, who would try to kill soldiers. And they did, in fact, assassinate some of our soldiers who were just available and could be targets. So there was a practice of non-fraternization, and perhaps for other reasons. But in one of the towns that I was, and I was able to learn a little German, I was able to speak some German, and no one else in my particular company could speak any German. They gave me an assignment in a town called Neustadt, which was in the Bavarian section of Germany, as the company interpreter. And I could kind of get along in the German language. And so I then had some access and had the use of a Jeep, and I could go into town, and I could do some, what you might call, interchange with the German people there. And many of whom, or most of whom, professed absolutely no acquiescence to Nazism and insisted that they'd never read the Hitler book Mein Kampf and what have you, although I found a copy of it in somebody's home and I still have it, in fact, somewhere. But most of the German people were just like folks. They went along with what their country, right or wrong, was up to, and had the kind of nationalistic feeling that perhaps Americans have, or Italians, or French, or British people, or Chinese people. Love their country, right or wrong. I'm sure that's applicable to some of the countries that we consider enemy countries of a sort today. Again, life experience, dealing with people with whom we or I would not normally have had an interchange with, an experience with, being at first in England, being then in France, Germany, and what have you, Czechoslovakia.
Well, very good. After you were discharged, you said you used the GI Bill to go to school.
I did. I went back to Columbia University in New York briefly. Then I had to go to work to try to earn some money for my mother and father, who weren't doing too well. And my dad was, for a period of time, unemployed. And so I worked and went to college at night. I went back to City College and then earned, in those years, one didn't need a bachelor's degree in order to enter a graduate school, so a professional school. I had an equivalency of college and life experience, which they allowed to enter law school. And there I went to law school and earned my law degree and was admitted to the New York Bar and the United States Supreme Court, and was able to practice law in New York. And having a taste for education, I went back even after I was a practicing lawyer in New York to do graduate studies in English with the thought, I think I mentioned, of perhaps earning a doctorate in English and literature, which never happened because of the exigencies of my work and the advent of marriage and children. I was married in 1951, our first child, and my children are alive and well now. I have 2 boys and a girl, all very well put together, very successful.
Wonderful. Did you stay in New York all the time?
Stayed in New York and for about 13 years after I was married in 1951, and then moved out to a suburb. Our children were growing up, and the apartment we had in New York City, Manhattan, was small. And we moved into a house and ultimately bought a home in northern New Jersey. So I was able to commute into New York to my law office and to some of the other businesses that I ultimately got into. I didn't stay with the practice of law all that many years. Intermittently, I'd done some legal work, but I got into certain other areas of business and spent many, many years in the magazine publishing field as business manager.
What brought you out to California?
Oh, probably the lure of wonderful weather. The cold of the East drove me out here. My older boy had come out some years earlier to practice medicine out here, and he's a physician here in California. And the reports I had had about the land of milk and honey out here, and being a golfer, and a rather ardent golfer at that, even though albeit not a very good one. At one time I could play rather well, but no longer. But I came out because I love golf and found Laguna Woods Village to be perfect for our needs, and my late wife and I enjoyed. We came here in 1994, almost 15 years ago. And
what have you been involved in here?
I beg your pardon?
What have you been involved in here?
Well, aside from golf and billiards and a couple of other forays into sport, my wonderful new bride, Terry Sunshine, who has been a musician and the head of a musical group for many years, got me involved into something that I had always loved, and that was singing. And so I've become a part of the Sunshine Performance Club, and we do performances now and have been doing so for some years. Even before we were married, we put on shows, and we continue to do so for benefit of the Saddleback Memorial Hospital Foundation, and now for the Alzheimer's Association in the auditorium of Clubhouse number 3. We do 2 major shows a year. We've had wonderful success in both artistically and enjoying performing for audiences and bringing what we think is good music of all kinds, musical variety, and raising money for these wonderful charities.
Well, that's marvelous. How often do you play golf?
Well, I play golf about 4 times a week, actually. Practice a little bit. I just recently played in the National Senior Olympics in golf and in table tennis up in Palo Alto. National Senior Olympics is held every 2 years. I didn't fare too well in golf. I did win a ribbon, come in 8th in my age bracket, but I surprised myself and won a bronze medal in table tennis, having beaten a few players who were rated quite a bit higher than I am rated.
Well, sounds like you have a wonderfully full life. Do your children live near enough that you can see them often?
Don't see them often. My doctor's son lives very close by, and we hardly ever see him because doctors work that many hours. My daughter lives in New Orleans, and my older My younger boy lives in a suburb of Seattle, and we communicate rather frequently, but we don't get to see each other very often.
But you found that Laguna Woods is a wonderful place to live?
Laguna Woods has been a dream come true, certainly for an active person, and I don't have to talk about the weather because once upon a time, when we were back in the cold, cold northern New Jersey region, a friend from a number of years who had been a merchant marine captain and had been to every place in the world had said, David, if you're being a golfer, you want some great weather, go to live in Southern California. Halfway between San Diego and Los Angeles along the ocean, said, that's the place for a golfer.
Wonderful. Well, did you ever join any service organizations after you got out?
Which,
like the American Legion or any of those?
no, I didn't. I kind of left my military life psychologically behind me. I don't go to war movies.
Well, I can see why.
There's nothing quite like the real thing.
Well, you don't really need to relive it. Thank you very much for coming and sharing this interview with you. You've had some interesting experiences, to say the least. And
I appreciate the opportunity, and I hope that we can get the Song of the Infantry known far and wide.
Okay, thank you very much.